Hello, welcome to the second episode of the Webcast Ecological Dynamics of Skill. In this first series, Pedro Passos and I, Duarte Araújo, will discuss ideas, research and applications with key players from both the academy and the professional practice who understand skill as a relational property of the performer, meaning that although skill has to do with the characteristics of the individual, it can only be defined in relation to a task and the context. This is certainly the case of Professor and Dean Chris Button, who is working since 2003 at the University of Otago, New Zealand. Chris is among the first PhD students of Professor Keith Davids who embrace an ecological dynamics approach to sport behavior. I remember well the first time we met in person when in 2003 Chris accepted the invitation to present at a symposium in the World Congress of Science and Football I was organizing with Tom Riley and Ian Cabri in Lisbon. Button's paper was named The Influential Role of Task Constraints in Acquiring Football Skills, and it was already mentioning learning phases that were not influenced by the mental information processing approach, such as the cognitive, associative, and autonomous phases, and he was presenting a relational and transactional or ecological understanding of it, mentioning the phases such as search, discover, and exploit, which became common in the ecological dynamics approach. Also, it was the first time I heard the term direct learning, which challenged the understanding of learning as synonym of memorization to a broader understanding of what learning means. With Keith Davids and Simon Bennett, Chris wrote the first edition of the Dynamics of Skill Acquisition book, which was printed in 2008, and recently he led its second edition. It is a pleasure to have you here, Chris, and I would like to start by asking what are the novel messages of this second edition of the book, which explicitly indicates that it follows an ecological dynamics approach.
Thank you, Duarte, and also thank you, Pedro, for inviting me. First of all, it's a pleasure to join you all the way from New Zealand. I'm in my living room, and so I'm not at work. It's 11 o'clock in the evening here, so I'm going to do my very best to try and entertain and stay awake. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the second edition of Dynamics of Skill Acquisition. It came out last year, just as we were heading across the world into lockdown. So the timing of the release probably couldn't have been any worse of the new book. But I'm certainly very happy with it. You said what are the key differences? Well, probably up front, I should acknowledge we've new co-authors. Professor Ludovic Seifert from Rouen joins us in the team, as does Jai Chow from Singapore. And there's this other Portuguese fella who I can't quite remember the name of, but it was you actually, Duarte. Yeah, you joined us as well. So it's a different team from the first edition, and it's a fantastic, in my opinion, the dream team in relation to ecological dynamics. We all share, I think, slightly different emphases in terms of our research and our understanding of ecological dynamics, but I think we also share many common ideas as well. So those five are the key authors. We've changed the structure of the book quite a lot in the first edition. I was always a little dissatisfied that there were 4 fairly heavy theory-based chapters prior to getting stuck into sort of practice. So in this edition, we've changed it so that each chapter throughout the book fuses theory with practice. So I think it's a little bit more accessible, hopefully, to not just researchers, but coaches, to students, obviously, as well as practitioners. So that's a big change. We've incorporated new, exciting laboratory activities, again, for the students, largely to get them engaged and not just to feel that this is something they sit down and read, but that they can use and work with. And in fact, about 70%, I think, of the material is new. We when we set out to write it, Duarte, you might remember when we had early meetings, we were talking about, maybe there'll be about 25% of the material will be new. But as we got stuck into the chapters, it became clear that so much has changed and been published since 2008 that we just couldn't do justice to the book without making it quite fresh. There's a lot of new research, new ideas from all over the world, published in very, very different laboratories. And yeah, I'm really proud, I think, of the fact that it is actually quite a different book. As much as I like the first book, I think this one is really good as well. And hopefully other people think so too. There's new chapters in there. We have a fantastic new chapter that you yourself, Duarte, lead wrote in terms of looking at athletes in terms of their intelligence and what that means from an ecological dynamics perspective. We've added a chapter which includes the socio-cultural constraints on athletes, and again, there's lots of emerging research in that space that's really exciting right now. We've got a new chapter that redefines learning, looks at it from both physical and perceptual processes. You talked about direct learning, Duarte, and that chapter again, I think is a really nice one, a new addition. And there's new chapters on talent identification and perceptual motor training. So there's all sorts of new material in there. Yeah, so I'm in a nutshell very happy with it. I'm certainly going to be trying to use it as much as I can in my teaching, and I hope that it encourages other researchers to engage with some of these ideas and to think about whether it's suitable for them. Yeah, so that's probably enough for me. And any more questions about it, or is there anything specifically you'd like me to refer to?
I have questions for you, Chris.
Good.
So can I start, Ward, or do you have any?
Please.
Okay, so I own the book and I read it. It's amazing, and congratulations to you both for this fantastic piece. It's mainly, the book is about motor learning, and as you said, one of the aims of the book is trying to redefine motor learning. But for me, one question still open. And I want your help trying to answer this question, which is, what happened to a performer when he learns to do something? What is the process of acquiring? I know that Duarte doesn't like very much the word of acquiring or acquisition. But anyway, it doesn't matter now. But what happened to a performer when he acquired a new technique, for instance? Can you tell us a little bit what is motor learning? What motor learning is about?
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'm going to refer to an activity which I know you like, because I've just started to learn to surf. Okay,
Nice.
so up until last year, I'd never managed to stand up on a surfboard. Never really managed to do anything other than get sort of flung off it without even managing to stay up on a surfboard. So over here in New Zealand, there's fantastic opportunities to go surfing. So I thought during lockdown, it might be quite a nice thing to try to learn. And stupidly, I thought this looks like a fairly simple sort of activity. Just stand up and, sort of look good, try to find a wave, and it'll just sort of take you into the beach. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I think it's been one of the most challenging things that I've ever tried to do. So what changes when people learn a skill? I certainly think there's a better appreciation of the environment in terms of what's happening around you. I certainly better understand, that waves are something not to be underestimated and to be respected. Mm-hmm. Of course, they come in regular patterns as well, and some regular, some irregular. So you get a bit of a sense of when a set of waves will come, and then a lull. And that, of course, as you know, from a surfing perspective, is an invitation to try to paddle out to the back of the waves. So again, I had no concept of that at all when I started. So I was trying to pummel my way through, paddling through these big waves and getting absolutely exhausted. I'm sure you remember this, Pedro, when you started
Exactly.
surfing. So it was for me an absolute battle to begin with, and I can imagine that for other learners, whatever the activities it is that they're learning, it can feel like that. It can be so frustrating. You just trying to get a sense of, a global sense of the way you need to move your body, and also, as I say, that appreciation of the environment. So for me, that's a key characteristic of learning. It is understanding what you and your body can achieve, but also how the environment is interacting around you, and learning to spot those opportunities to harness, of course, the energy that's out there in the environment, because I'm still very much early on this sort of learning journey with regards surfing. So I don't think I've actually really acquired anything yet, other than just a bit of an awareness, I guess, around that environment, and I guess also a knowledge of what it is that I need to do. Need to get out more regularly. I need to perhaps think about the sort of conditions I go surfing in. Maybe ignore those really high 3-meter waves for a while until I can cope with the more gentle stuff. So the long answer to your question, but for me, those are some of the key characteristics that changed as I've been learning this task.
Yeah, okay. But when you learn, in a certain way, you change the way you interact with the surfboard, the way you interact with the waves. It is a transformation process, right? I know that in your book, you talk about the concept that might be a little bit weird for the persons who are not so familiar with ecological dynamics and with the dynamical system theory, which is an attractor. And I know that you, up to a certain point, you relate the learning transformations, the learning process with the building of an attractor. So can you give us a little bit more information regarding these? So in your process of learning to surf, which I hope you continue, how these attractors may change in the course of your learning process.
Sure. And again, an attractor from a dynamical systems perspective is really just another word for a stable movement pattern. So for me, it's about trying to find a stable movement pattern, which will allow me to get up, stand up onto the board, and to be able to direct the board so I can take advantage of the energy of the wave as it comes in from behind me. And that in itself is a challenge, because I need to work out a way that I can, first of all, spot a good wave that's going to be appropriate for me, be in the right position in the sea to be able to just catch it as it's beginning to break. And of course, then I also need to hop up onto the board as relatively quickly. This is, again, something I'm learning that, I thought, this could be just done, over a cup of tea or however long it might take me. But of course, it must be done relatively quickly. And again, that does take a bit of technique. So, I wouldn't say that I've got it nailed and it's an attractive state right now. It's still very unstable. But yeah, as I learn, as I gather confidence, I've started to notice this. It was a gradual process, but all of a sudden, every now and again, I'm sort of getting that movement pattern, and it is, I think, quite a non-linear process. It wasn't for me that it was just going to gradually, get better and better and better. Instead, it seemed to come in fits and starts, and sometimes I thought I had it and I didn't, and it went backwards. And other times I really got it, in a session, I could be up on the board several times. So that non-linearity as well is a characteristic of developing these attractor states.
I noticed that one word that you use that make me curious is about stable. How can we aim to do something stable in an environment which is everything then stable as the sea, as the waves? The waves are not stable. Well, of course, it depends of if it is a sea break, if it is a sand break or shore break. Well, it depends. But how can we relate this stable concept associated with the attractors, with the instability or the variability of the environment? Can you help us a little bit? Because I'm curious because an attractor is a stable state. You're right. And I think that when we learn, we need to jump from one attractor to another attractor. So we need to disturb one attractor in order to jump to another attractor, which means another kind of movement. So how can all the things can get together?
Yeah, it's a common misconception, I think, that the word stable means the same, that it's the same pattern, that you're performing. But that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. So a stable pattern can change and it can be adaptable. And in fact, that's the characteristic of stability, that it's resistant to the changes around it, so that the global pattern of me getting up onto the board is maintained, even if I'm moving in subtly different ways to get up onto that board. And again, I think this is something that skilled surfers like yourself, I'm sure Pedro would be able to tell me.
I'm not skilled. Sorry. No, surf for me is a therapy. I'm not skilled. I just do my waves. But I enjoy a lot.
But the idea again that you do need to change, but you can still have a stable pattern is important. I think a lot of people when I'm teaching students often get that confused. They think it means that it's just the same pattern that doesn't change. But stability is really just about the pattern being resistant to perturbation and change from outside. So
and don't you think that one of the challenge that remain regarding research on ecological dynamics is how to identify and how to characterize the attractors? I think that is one of the things that most attract me when I start working with Keith and with Duarte is, okay, how can I characterize an attractor? And what are the control parameters that make me understand when we jump from one attractor to another? I think this kind of challenge remains. I'm not sure if we evolve too much on this area of research. What do you think about this?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point. We were sort of blessed, I think, with Kelso's work of this real simple sort of attractor pattern, with bimanual finger movement, which seemed, so intuitive and perhaps pleasant, to understand and to grasp the idea of an attractor state. But then, of course, once we went beyond sort of single-digit movements or single degree of freedom joints to whole body movements, where there's an awful amount of capacity for joints to co-adapt and interact together, and degeneracy becomes such a fundamental characteristic of human movement that it becomes quite difficult to find these attractor states. And as you suggest, the order parameters that characterize them. And then, of course, the challenges are saying is, well, what are the control parameters that need to change to move me from an attractor state to another one? So, we, in some regards, we were blessed, I think, with that early Kelso work, but we've struggled perhaps to jump out and to move beyond it. But that was actually the basis of my PhD, was to look at how reaching and grasping could be considered a culmination, if you want, of an attractor state, where we're looking to move in a discrete way, not in a cyclical way, but in a discrete way to move out and grasp an object. And that was then extended out into ball catching, and then since then I've gone on to other sport-related activities.
Very nice. Okay. Let me jump in a little bit.
Jump it.
Well, I would like I'll have a sip of wine while you're talking.
That's very good. You always have a good excuse to have a good wine. But I would like just to emphasize the idea that this stable pattern means that you can maintain a continuous interaction with the environment where you are. So it means stable in this sense of continuing what you are doing. And also that this pattern cannot exist without those circumstances. So it's not something that you have inside of you. It's something that happens at that particular circumstances, with waves, with wind, with the board. And this is what characterizes the pattern. But I would like to take this chance that we are talking about water sports, which I know that you have researched a lot. And I would like to start by asking you a very interesting socio-cultural aspect of teaching swimming that you told me about the Maori culture, that it's very different from the one we have here in Europe. Can you tell us a little bit about these changes, about how to learn how to swim to a Maori, for example, and the difference between the sea and the swimming pool, for example?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks for the question. So the Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand, and they do have quite a different approach to water safety. In fact, they don't have in Maori, they don't have a word for safety. Instead, it's respect, which actually I prefer. I think the idea of respecting your aquatic environment rather than being safe from it is nice, because even in that they're recognizing that being in water and interacting with the sea, with rivers, with lakes, and can be an incredibly pleasurable and spiritual experience for the Maori. It's very much part of their history, the way that families connect with each other. They'll go hunting for seafood and things like that together. That's in Maori, it's called kai. So that it's very much a part of their background, what connects and binds them, but gives them their identity. And so when a Maori person introduces themselves to you, they talk about their mountain where they grew up, which was close to a mountain, and also the river that was close to them. And that is what again gives them their sense of identity. So they have quite a different, I think, almost a philosophical approach to the environment as a whole, but in particular to water. So they spend a lot of time as families learning, but they don't tend to go to swimming pools. They tend to learn in open water environments like rivers or lakes or estuaries. And there's a purpose to what they're learning. Again, it's not just about being able to swim from one side of a pool to another and back again and doing it as efficiently as they can. But instead, again, they're looking to enjoy time together as a family, but to do things like to search for food, to play, to share stories with each other. So I really like that sense of learning something with a real purpose. It's a real meaningful way of learning. So we're looking to try to use some of these ideas and philosophies and some of the research that I'm doing on water safety education here, not just with Maori now, but with other people and cultures in New Zealand.
So this indicates that there are really strong socio-cultural aspects to the learning of swimming. And maybe this is what also justifies that they don't go to a swimming pool. Can you tell us a little bit about it? I was fascinated by the reason why they don't go to a swimming pool. Can you?
Yeah. So they have many legends, myths, spiritual ideas, and they have a series of gods. And one god is called Tangaroa, and he's the god of the seas. And so they think that the tides and the waves and things like that are all part of this god Tangaroa, and so that the water has spirit almost. And therefore, that's why they like to go to the water. Again, it's like paying respect to this god. But in terms of a swimming pool, it's a very sterile environment, and the Maori, I don't think Tangaroa is really present in a swimming pool. So they would see getting into a pool as quite a different, and for the different reasons, why they would choose to do that. And again, I really like that idea that that there's a sort of spiritual meaning to what they're doing and why they're doing it. So, yeah, I mean, the problem, of course, with learning outside of a swimming pool is it's dangerous, and it's more dangerous, more risky. You can't see necessarily the floor, how deep the water is. There's currents, there's waves. It's often colder than a swimming pool. So for all of those factors, unfortunately, Maori have a bad record for drowning over here in New Zealand. So it's something that, again, we're really trying to help to address and work with them. But again, I don't think it's because their education is wrong. I think they have more exposure to the water because they're just engaged in it and love being in the water more often.
So, if I understood it correctly, this is also the research you've been conducting for the last years about water safety. Can you tell us a little bit what are you doing right now about it, or what are you finding about water
Sure.
safety? And yeah.
Yeah, so for about the last 10 years or so, I've been really interested in water safety over here in New Zealand. It's a real problem. About 100 people a year die from drowning in New Zealand, and relative to our population, which is only about 5 million, that's one of the worst records in the developed world. So we do have an issue with drowning, and most of the drownings happen in open water. They don't tend to happen in swimming pools or in baths or in enclosed environments. So yeah, what we've been doing is looking at some of the factors that influence drowning. One of them was cold water. We had a really neat study here where we dropped students into really cold 10 degrees Celsius water. And we looked to see how far they could swim and whether they were able to judge, their capacity to swim. You're probably aware that if you were to jump into cold water, you get cold shock, you gasp, and you're hyperventilating, your heart rate is hammering. So we did some measurements, some physiology measurements around that. And we were able to show, of course, that cold shock is a short-lived thing. So for about 2 to 3 minutes, you're in this very sort of shocked-like state. But then after that, it subsides. And that's probably the time, if you're going to try to save yourself, that you should even think about maybe swimming to rescue. So we started doing some research on cold water, but then we've more recently started to work with children and younger people and explore how they're getting taught, but also where they're getting taught, because New Zealand's similar to most of the rest of the world, where the children are taught over here mainly in swimming pools. But I suspect that it's better for them to actually have some exposure to open water pools, even when they're early learners, and learn about these different environments, because, as I said, this is where drowning's happening. It doesn't tend to happen in swimming pools. So yeah, we're working with projects with young children now, looking to try to improve how they learn and see if they can benefit from a mixture of swimming pool learning as well as out in open water.
Good.
Yeah. So, Chris, let's go back to your surf and to representative learning designs. I'll go straight to my question. Don't you think that sometimes it is useful and necessary to design some training designs which are less representative? For instance, I know that, well, at least here in the surf schools in Portugal, people learn to do the takeoff on the sand. So the first stages of learning, people learn to do a movement which must be performed in the water, but they do it, the first thing they do is do it on a stable, dry environment. And sometimes, then they move to the water. And then I noticed that sometimes the coaches bring the performers again to the sand to perform again the takeoff. So my question is, should we apply always a representative learning design, or sometimes it is useful or even necessary to go to a less representative design in order to improve learning? I want to know your opinion.
That's a great question. Yeah, that activity is quite common over here. Had I gone for formal lessons, I'm sure that would have been the first thing that a teacher would have taught, would have been, on the sand, as you say, lying on the board, pop up onto the board, and we'll be doing that multiple times before I even got into the water. But of course, I'm self-taught completely, complete discovery learning. So I've been doing all of my pop-ups out on the water. I think this something that's, and this is a really good question around representative learning design. So in some situations, maybe it's okay to choose an environment where it doesn't exactly represent what you're going to perform in later on. But I think there's also, you have to be careful about doing that where there's fundamental differences between the environment that you're looking to be able to perform in and the one where you're practicing. So if I was to spend too long doing this activity on the sand and not being aware of the moment when I should be jumping up onto the board, because that I think is the key to surfing in my novice-like activity, is knowing that moment when the nose of the board just starts to lift and the power of the wave is getting, beneath the board. you don't get that on the sand, Pedro.
Exactly.
All you get is a foolish look on your face because you're jumping up onto a board and occasionally falling off.
Yeah.
So that's I guess where I wouldn't spend too much time practicing, in those sort of very impoverished environments. I'd be looking to get to an environment that's more representative relatively quickly.
I totally agree with you. But when we move on to team sports, for instance, which so many variables, the interactions between teammates and the interactions with the defenders. And when we talk about representative learning designs, people tend to ask us, so is everything about the game? So the representative learning design, you put the players play the game, and that's it. That is a training session. No, it is not. You need to choose some subphases that are representative of what happens in a match. That's why I'm asking this. Is sometimes we need to recreate some. I'm not sure if this is correct to say, but sometimes you need to decrease a little bit the representativeness of the design in order to trying to get some aims, trying to get some goals. Are we moving towards representative learning design methodology in the future? Do you think? Because this is new. This is all brand new.
Yeah. It is. I mean, Brunswick's ideas, of course, have been around for some time, but we've just started to really understand and apply them more in the motor learning field. I teach team sports as well, coach football. It's my other passion other than water safety. So, and there's often times where I'm coaching a group of children and I find, they're just not getting this concept or idea where we're kicking the ball around or passing. So often I'll get them just to pick the ball up and throw the ball to each other and to try to explain concept or an idea, by simplifying the task a little bit. Now, I don't think for me that I've chosen to take the task and make it less representative. Instead, I've looked to try to, make the task a little bit less challenging and demanding for them. Yes. But I can still, I think, get the concept and idea across better than perhaps, taking them into a completely different environment. But I do understand what you're saying. Sometimes, an athlete, a high performance athlete might just get sick to death of the same environment, or there may be injury concerns, about competing in the same way. We do a little bit of work here with snow sports in New Zealand, and they use these big mats or bags, to jump into and do some of the aerial maneuvers so that they land in the bags rather than on snow, because they get it wrong, of course they get injured. So I've had very interesting chats with coaches here about whether that is conflicting with representative learning design to do that. And of course there are other research studies on things like diving where some researchers in our field have shown that, again, if you dive into these sort of practice pits like they do in gymnastics as well, maybe you get a slightly different sort of behavior than you would if the consequences are different than when they're diving into a pool or diving onto the snow.
Sure. The interesting thing is that time flies so fast when we are discussing these things. While Pedro is selecting one or two questions from the chat, I will just like to highlight something about representative design, in the sense that it's not really about representing the environment, but representing the function, highlighting the functions. And this function can be with more how can I say, more simplified means of how the environment is presented. And in this way, it can be really in the sand, it can be really in different, with other different components, but that where the function that you are training is present. So this is, I think, a key point in representative design. But as Pedro says, there is a way that we are trying to do in a sense of having a methodology that shows all these paths towards representativeness. Pedro, did you find any questions for?
Yeah, I did. There is a nice question here from Vera from Finland, and he asks, would you say that the concept of stability refers also to increasing expertise in that a more skilled performer is not so sensitive to external environmental perturbations?
Yeah, very good question, Vera, and I completely agree that increasing expertise can be linked to increasing stability. Yeah, so that their movement pattern is not so sensitive to subtle changes in the environment. So that's one of the goals of expertise, but it might not be, again, given a certain situation, a wise move to have one completely deep, stable attractor pattern that you can't move from. In some situations you need multi-stability, the ability to jump from an attractor to another. So but the point is, usually increasing expertise is about developing more stability in their movement patterns.
Yeah, we have questions arising. We also have a nice question from Fernando Pereira, a colleague of ours, and he says, how do you define swimming in open water in terms of a dynamical skills acquisition? Can you comment on that, Chris?
Yes, so hopefully I explained that open water is maybe not in enclosed environments like swimming pools, but more natural, open outdoor environments such as a beach or a river. But in terms of skill acquisition, many of the skills that you might learn in a swimming pool, you can of course learn outdoors, but you might be familiar with the fact that there are other skills as well that you might need to learn, like duck diving under waves, or using a current in a river, getting yourself into a good floating position so that if you ever fell into a river, if you're out tramping anyone and you fall into a river with a heavy bag on, then try to get your feet so they're pointing down flow, and get your arms across your chest so that you can maybe stop yourself from getting caught or snagged on rocks or what are called strainers from outdoor education perspective. So there are a range of skills you can learn outside, but the key point is that the outside environment, the open water environments, are much more dynamic, much more difficult to read, and that's a skill in itself, is learning to read your environment more effectively.
Very nice. We have time for one more question. Pedro, did you select one?
Well, there is nice questions here in the chat. I'm experiencing some difficulty in choosing one, but I think I will choose this one from Marianne Davids. She said, if the behavior is similar and still adaptive, will the safety element of reducing some representation be okay, as long as there is an understanding and not done too much?
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I was getting at. Nice question, Marianne. Nice to hear from you. Sort of what I was getting at earlier with the surfing example is that I think it's a bit extreme to say, oh no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't jump onto a board out in the sand, particularly maybe if there's a certain thing that you're looking to, sort of draw someone's attention to. But I just wouldn't do it a lot. I wouldn't do it too often. Yeah, I'd have to have a pretty good reason to do it, rather than just to do it for because it's easier to do it that way. And I think that's what happens to coaches and teachers. Maybe it's a little bit of laziness. Sometimes you just want maybe a nice static controlled environment where you can have the full attention of the learner when you're giving instructions or feedback. So maybe that sort of addresses what Marianne's getting at.
Very nice. So
Eduard, sorry. There is one more question that I would like to put to Chris.
I've got plenty of wine to drink, so we can go for as long as you want.
No, it comes from the chat, from Big Picture Soccer, where he asked, if skill is construed as an adaptive relationship between performance and environment, how can we differentiate a skill performance in absence of relevant information? Environment, sorry.
Can we talk about a skilled performer without an environment for reference?
Oh, okay. So they're not skilled, they're no longer skilled if they don't have an environment. So if I took Lionel Messi off the football pitch, how would I be able to tell that he's a skilled player? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Do they continue to have skill outside of their environment? Well, I think in his case, and I'm sure in other skilled performers' cases, there'll be elements of transferability they could take from that environment to others. I suspect he'd be an incredibly good futsal player. He's probably a very good athlete all round. So I think he would still exhibit elements of skill, and he would certainly have, of course, plethora of stories to tell us about, how he's become such a good player. So yeah, I think it's still possible to say that he would be skilled. He wouldn't be able to express it in the way that he does so wonderfully on a football pitch.
Very nice. Time is flying really, and which is a good sign. And I thank very much all those that are participating. Before I present the next speaker for the next week, Pedro would like to say something and about
just to tell everyone that we are organizing a Sport Science Congress, digital and online version, which is now in the YouTube. As you can see here, you can get all the information that you need in the link in the site, but just trying to take a look. This Congress will be held from here in Lisbon from 13 to 21st of July. And I think it is a very nice opportunity for those who want to present the most recent research work in a short communication format. And well, all these with a fee which is quite acceptable. So we hope to receive your abstracts and see you in this digital format in the next month. I hope so. So thank you, everyone.
Very nice. So for the next week, we will have Jai Shaw, also one of the authors of the Dynamics of Skill Acquisition that Chris was talking about minutes before, and he will have quite a hellish presentation talking about what the hell is nonlinear pedagogy. Of course, this question was raised by Pedro, who really wants to make the sharp questions to all our guests. Well, Chris, thank you very much for being here. I know that it's late now in New Zealand, but you are here very sharp and clear as always. And I thank all those that participate in this chat and assisting to our webcast. Thank you very much, and we will be here next week.
Thank you. Cheers.